This happened about a year ago. Late on a cold winter evening, I was coming home from work. All I wanted was to spend the rest of the night in warmth and comfort, to sit with a cup of hot tea and lemon, to watch some television while sinking into my soft, warm armchair. The entire day had gone wrong. First, I was late for work. My car wouldn't start because of the freezing cold. Then at work, the management was in a bad mood, and that mood spread to everyone. That's why I just wanted to relax and rest once I got home. I entered the lobby of my apartment building and brushed the snow off my coat. Then I pressed the elevator button. A dull click answered me. The elevator clearly had no intention of going anywhere. With a heavy sigh, I started climbing the stairs. When I reached my floor, I found it completely dark. The hallway light was out for some unknown reason. I took out my phone and used its screen to light the way as I unlocked my door. I don't know why, but I suddenly had the feeling that someone was watching me. An unpleasant chill ran down my spine. Finally managing to open the lock, I stepped inside, then turned around. No one was there. I calmed down. I went into the apartment, turned on the hallway light, locked the door, and began to undress. I tossed aside my hat and jacket, pulled off my boots, then went to the bathroom to wash away the exhaustion of the day. I put the kettle on, sliced some lemon, walked into the living room, and turned on the television. I found my favorite show, made my tea, and settled comfortably into the armchair. I relaxed. After some time, I must have dozed off. I woke up suddenly to the sound of someone persistently ringing my landline phone. Jumping to my feet and cursing under my breath, I walked over and picked up the receiver. There was complete silence on the other end. I shouted, "Hello," but heard nothing in response. Annoyed, I hung up and went to bed. I glanced at the clock. It was 15 minutes to midnight. I straightened the bed, buried my face in the soft pillow, and immediately fell asleep. Then the phone rang again. I woke up. The clock read exactly 3 a.m. Yawning, I picked up the receiver. Again, silence. Thinking someone was playing a cruel joke, I was already about to say everything I thought about the caller, when suddenly I heard a woman crying. Then came static. Through the crackling noise, the crying was still audible. Suddenly, a sharp scream, and then silence. Startled, I slowly put the receiver down. I went into the kitchen, lit a cigarette, and stood there thinking about the strange phone call. Eventually, I convinced myself not to dwell on it, that it must have been someone's stupid prank. I went back to bed. For a while, the anxiety wouldn't leave me, but eventually, exhaustion won, pulling me into sleep. The dream was terrifying. Someone was watching me, and that gaze filled me with pure terror. I woke up feeling completely drained. After getting ready for work, I left the building. Outside, there was a police car parked near the entrance, and a crowd of neighbors standing around, loudly discussing something. I stepped closer, and from their conversation, learned what had happened. The night before, around 8 in the evening, a murder had taken place in our building. A drunk resident had argued with his girlfriend. He beat her and strangled her to death. Then, after swallowing a large amount of pills and washing them down with alcohol, he died as well. A lot of time has passed since that terrible evening. The neighbors no longer talk about it. But sometimes, I still ask myself, was that call on that night a call from the other side? say this right away. I never believed in the supernatural. I thought all of it was nonsense until I moved into my uncle's apartment in St. Petersburg. The place was huge, but its history was dark. My uncle, my father's brother, shot himself there in 2011. He had a criminal past, served serious time. His body lay locked inside the upstairs room for nearly a full day. The apartment had 2 levels, and no one knew. The blood soaked so deeply into the parquet floor that the wood had to be completely sanded down. A year ago, another uncle moved in, the youngest of my father's brothers, with his young wife, and that's when everything began. She was a nervous woman, and soon started complaining. She said one afternoon she was lying down, half asleep. She opened her eyes and saw a woman standing by the vanity. Her back was turned, long black hair, tangled, coarse, like rope. She stood perfectly still. Half asleep, my aunt thought it was a relative visiting. She called out. No response. She blinked. The woman was gone. After that, it got worse. At night, someone began knocking on the door. Slowly, evenly. Knock, knock, knock. You'd open it. The hallway was empty. Once she woke up because the bed sank beside her, as if someone incredibly heavy had lain down next to her. She screamed and ran out of the apartment that same night. The place stood empty. I needed somewhere to live. I'm not easily scared, I thought. Why let it go to waste? I renovated, bought new furniture, mounted a TV. A week passed, nothing happened. I figured my aunt had just lost her nerve. Then came Wednesday. I was lying in bed, watching a movie. Lights off, only blue light from the screen. After midnight. And then, a knock, clear, loud, right at the door. I jumped up and opened it. No one there. The hallway was empty. Enough with the jokes, I shouted into the darkness. I lay back down. As soon as I closed my eyes, another knock, stronger this time. I crept up to the door, pressed my ear against it, breathing, heavy, rasping, whistling through the throat. I yanked the handle open. Nothing. But when I turned back toward the room, my legs nearly gave out. She was standing there, right beside the bed, the same woman my aunt had described. Now I could see her face, pale, corpse white, sharp features. Her mouth twisted into a horrible grin. She stood there, shaking silently, laughing without sound. I ran, straight out into the stairwell. I sat there trembling for nearly an hour. Eventually my breathing slowed, and the stairwell was freezing. I went back inside. Nothing there. I forced the thoughts away. Decided to try to sleep. Pulled the blanket over my head, left just enough space to breathe. Then it became hot. I threw the blanket off and looked up. An old ceiling fan hung above the bed. Heavy, outdated, left from my dead uncle's time. And there she was, hanging upside down from it, her hands and legs wrapped around the frame. Her hair hung down, almost brushing my face. Her eyes, solid white, locked onto mine. She swayed slowly with the fan blades, creak, creak, and she smiled. The smile was so wide it looked like her skin might tear. "You found me, idiot," she hissed, choking on laughter. Then came the crash. The fan tore free from the ceiling. The heavy metal mass slammed into the pillow, inches from my head. If I hadn't jerked aside a second earlier, my skull would have split open. I ran from that apartment wearing nothing but fear. I never went back. Later, my father told me, seriously, that neighbors had complained. They said that after dark, from that apartment, you could always hear someone laughing. I was about 10, maybe 12 years old. It was a moonless December night, thick and dark, almost inky, and sleep refused to come. My bedroom was located at the very top of the old house we'd moved into not long before. It felt like a nest beneath the roof. There was my bed, a wardrobe, a desk, a chair, a small storage room filled with forgotten things, and a playroom where I used to spend my early childhood. I was lying in the darkness, shifting from side to side, when a sound came from the far corner of the room. Quiet, barely noticeable, a creak. At first, I thought it was the wind brushing against the old oak tree outside my window, but then the sound came again, slower, clearer. I froze. My heart began to pound violently, and then I saw it. In the dim light, almost dissolving into the shadows, my old wooden rocking horse began to move, slowly at first, then a little stronger. Then again, it slid across the floor, producing a long, hollow creak, a sound that felt as if it belonged to the night itself. I watched, unable to move, as it rocked on its own, as if an unseen child were riding it in the darkness. The minutes stretched endlessly. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Finally, gathering what little courage I had left, I reached for the light switch. Click. The room filled with light, and the rocking horse stopped instantly, perfectly still. I didn't wait. Terrified, I pulled the blanket over my head and curled into a tight ball, staying there until morning. Under the blanket, I felt safe. Morning brought no comfort. Sunlight revealed the rocking horse standing in the middle of the room, so it hadn't been a dream. At breakfast, my parents looked at me sternly. They said they had heard the rocking again. They said I must have gotten out of bed. I tried to explain. They didn't believe me. A few nights later, it happened again. And this time, my father came into the room. He saw it. The rocking horse was moving. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Later, a neighbor told us the truth. Years ago, a little boy had died in that room. He was 8 years old, and he loved his wooden rocking horse. After that, my parents moved the toy into the garage. I've slept peacefully ever since. But sometimes, I still think about that night, about how the past doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes, it comes back. You know, there was one unexplained incident in my life. Our former neighbors were very elderly people, well into their 80s. They were forced to move into a small one-bedroom apartment because our old building was scheduled for demolition. And then the old man, may he rest in peace, George Anderson, simply could not endure that cramped, enclosed space, and he died. The elderly couple had no close relatives living nearby, and who could help them then? That's right, the neighbors, that is, my mother and I, and a few of their old trusted friends. And so I was sitting there at night, beside the coffin. Margaret Anderson, the old woman, had fallen ill. The loss of her husband had hit her terribly hard. She was sleeping, and I sat there thinking, so to speak, about the fragility of existence and the fleeting nature of time. I remembered the old woman's words, her story of how it all happened. He passed away so quickly. He lay down, took a breath. His wife Margaret sat down on the floor beside him, hugged him, and kissed him tightly. And then he suddenly said, "Well, Maggie, this is the last time you're kissing me." He smiled, closed his eyes, and died. Of course, Margaret was devastated by the loss of her husband. They had lived together, just think of it, for more than 60 years. And there I was again, sitting by the coffin at night, lost in thought, And suddenly, I saw something. On the dead man's body, there were swarms of lice. They were crawling over him, running along the inside walls of the coffin. But strangely, they did not crawl out, not onto the floor, not onto the outside of the coffin. I felt deeply disturbed by the sight of such an enormous number of lice. I had never seen anything like it before, especially since both of them had always been extremely neat, clean people. There was always a cloth napkin on the table. The bread box was always covered. The sugar bowl, draped with a small decorative lace doily. Everything was always perfectly clean, despite their age. And then suddenly, lice, in an unthinkably massive quantity. In the morning, I said nothing to the old woman, but when I came home, I asked my mother why this could have happened and where they could have come from at all. My mother said it was a bad omen, that the family line of that married couple, our former neighbors, had most likely come to an end. We buried our neighbor, held a memorial. I walked through the room and the kitchen, carefully examining the floor, the walls, and our belongings. But I found no lice, not a single one. It was strange, very strange. Still, I had to stay overnight with the old woman. She was afraid to sleep alone in the apartment. Not long after that, distant relatives arrived from New York and took Margaret away. It was incredibly hard for her, almost unbearable, to leave the place where she had lived her entire life, the place where her son lay buried, a son who had returned from the war and then, for no clear reason, suddenly died. The place where her husband now rested, the man with whom she had lived a long, happy life. That place held her heart, her memories, and something more, something we call fate or life itself. And I realized that this was how the earthly existence of a family came to an end. A family with whom we had lived side by side, just through the wall, for 22 years. And when I sometimes remember them, I think about how two people, a man and a woman, find each other for love and happiness. But there is always something, or someone, who, one way or another, forces a person to experience the bitterness of losing those closest to them. And the lice. We do not know what this truly means from a divine point of view. But we do know that they are blood-sucking, deeply unpleasant creatures. And most often, they appear when a person has long and carefully hidden their heartache and their loneliness after a loss. When they never once spoke it aloud. When they carried it and carried it inside themselves for as long as they could. May my former neighbors rest in peace. They were truly wonderful people. I spent most of my life working rotational shifts in the far north. The work in such harsh conditions isn't easy, but it pays well. The Arctic is something impossible to fully describe with words. To truly understand it, you have to be there. The North also acts like litmus paper. It quickly shows what kind of person someone really is. Before long, you know who you'd never go on a dangerous mission with and who you could trust with your life. That's exactly the kind of person my colleague Andrew is. He's from Ohio, a man of his word and his actions. Like me, he's worked rotational shifts in the Arctic for many years as a site power engineer. Serious, responsible, honest. I trust everything he says because he's never given me a reason to doubt him. One day, after returning from his break between shifts, Andrew told me a mysterious story that happened to his younger son, Daniel. I know Daniel personally. He came to the work site with his father twice to earn money for a new motorcycle. Daniel is a serious young man, just like his father. No bad habits. He studies cardiology at a medical university in Chicago. In high school, he practiced kickboxing and aikido for several years. He wasn't exceptional, but he could stand up for himself. He also loved motorsports and, until last year, was a fearless biker. Andrew helps his son financially, of course, but Daniel refuses to live off his parents. Whenever possible, he earns his own money for gas, gear, and daily expenses. Last year, during his free time from studying, Daniel worked part-time as an orderly at a morgue. That's where he came face to face with something truly unexplainable. Before that night, Daniel had already worked several daytime shifts at the morgue. On his way to his first, and, as it turned out, last, night shift, he was cut off by an aggressive driver. A fight broke out. The road rager lost a couple of teeth, and the student lost his laptop and smartphone. The man snatched the bag from Daniel's hands and threw it several yards away, shouting obscenities. When Daniel arrived at work, he discovered that his phone was smashed and the laptop wouldn't turn on at all. He and the pathologist, an older man everyone called Steve, tried to fix it, unsuccessfully. It was well past midnight when Steve said, "Work is work, but good sleep is important for your health. I'm going to lie down. You're in charge, student. Wake me if anything happens." Realizing he'd be alone among the dead, Daniel asked, "So, how is it here at night? Anything unusual? I've heard so many creepy stories about morgues." "Stories?" Steve shrugged. "Life is full of strange things. Why tell them before sleep? Work here long enough. You'll see for yourself." He poured himself a nearly full glass of clear liquid. "Alcohol?" Daniel asked. "Living water," Steve replied cryptically, raising a finger. He glanced at the gurneys covered with sheets, paused and said, "Rest in peace." He downed the glass, bit into a thick slice of lemon, and slowly walked to his office to sleep. Daniel went to the restroom. When he returned, he was stunned to see his older biker friend, an electrical engineer by profession, sitting at the table fixing his broken laptop. After a moment of shock, Daniel asked, "Man, how did you get in here?" "Coincidence," his friend replied. "You'll understand soon. Let me fix this for you and give you some important advice." After repairing the laptop, his friend unexpectedly told Daniel to sell his motorcycle and quit riding. He said it was dangerous, that many bikers die or become disabled. Then he suggested, "Let's have some tea. It's cold in here." Daniel went to fill the kettle, but when he returned, his friend was gone. In the morning, Steve came back and said they needed to prepare the body of a man killed in a motorcycle accident. He pointed to the gurney Daniel had to bring. They had to call an ambulance. Daniel fainted when he saw the body. It was his friend, the same one who had repaired his laptop just hours earlier. The body had been brought in shortly before Daniel arrived for his shift. After that, Daniel never worked at the morgue again. He sold his motorcycle and gear, just as his late friend had advised, and gave the money to his friend's family. Now he works part-time at a hospital. He has 1 year of studies left, and the laptop still works perfectly.